I have glasses, Mark, but even with the glasses, they're too far away, and I don't want to really go like this. So here I am. You're getting the real spontaneous thing here. All right. So I was a hospice nurse for 12 years, the last 12 years of my working. It's just been a year since, not quite a year since I retired. And it was the most extraordinary privilege and honor and gift for me to be able to do this work. And I met the most extraordinary people. I was welcomed into the most wonderful homes and families, and to whatever degree I was able to help them, and I do believe that I was, I got so much more. I'm so much who I am because of these people. And what I would love is I would just love to bring some of them here to be with me, because they are great. They're just great. And if I'm going to start with talking about hospice and my work with hospice, it starts with my mother. And if you thought I was already crying, imagine what's going to happen now. Anyway, my mother died 29 years ago, and she was a totally extraordinary woman. And she lived the most extraordinary life. She loved unconditionally. She had an incredible family. She worked in her community. She founded the Illinois Coalition Against the Death Penalty. She really, and she was fun. She was really fun. Anyway, she just led this extraordinary life. And then she got cancer and she was going to die. And I was already a nurse. And there were a couple things beside just the experience of that for me. And one was what an extraordinary gift it was. I was able to be her caregiver. I was able to be with her at home. She wanted to die in our little cottage in Michigan. I was able to take her there with my whole family. There was one day that the entire family from all over the country was there. And she died there. And that's what she wanted. That's where she felt closest to my father, who had died 27 years before that. Anyway, so that was just a gift. And I wanted to be able to have other people be able to have that experience. And that's why I knew that I wanted to do hospice nursing. Another thing that I learned from my mom, well, there were a lot of, but we're just talking about dying, is one of the reasons I told you about her life and how extraordinary she was, is that I had this fantasy that my mother was going to then say, you know, it's just been great and I'm ready to let go. And my mother never did that. She just wouldn't do it, you know? And I, grew up, or didn't grow up, but I certainly went to nursing school where Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the big thing, and you go through, you deny and bargain, and you're angry, whatever you do, there's another one, and then you get to acceptance. And my mother never did that. And I had this idea that she should, she really should do that. Especially when she had this extraordinary life. That's why I bothered to tell you what an extraordinary life she had. And she was 73 years old, which is not that old. But she kept saying to me, and this must be something in the Bible, she would say that that's 3 more than the Bible promises us, or something, she said. So my point is, she was extraordinarily gracious about her death, and she really let us share it. But she never wanted to die. She never stopped hoping for a miracle. She never accepted it. Okay? Well, I had this idea, being a hospice nurse. I didn't, even though my mother didn't do it quite right, I still kind of thought, well, and so I then started to become a hospice nurse and started to do this, full time, and this is what I was doing. And the truth is, basically what I found was my mother, people don't die happily. Of course they're not going to die happily, I mean, the point is, what I hoped was that I would have this experience and people would, I'd help them, yes, but then it would be this experience of their spiritual, awakening and letting go, and they'd review their life, and they would then talk about what they thought was going to be happening, and that I would be, a part of that. And that hardly ever happened. Ever. I mean, a couple times, I had a couple people that wanted to die consciously. And otherwise, it just wasn't the way. It just wasn't the case. And I mean, not only that, but it was common. Not common is a strong word, but it was certainly not uncommon that hospice patients, you couldn't even use the word with them. They didn't want to use the word hospice. The patient, who knows if the patient didn't want us to use the word, because it was the family that always told us we can't use the word. So there's just so much denial and resistance and ignoring of death. And even in a situation where this is supposed to be something that is, okay to talk about, it doesn't happen a lot. It just really doesn't happen a lot, was my experience. Okay. That's why I used to say, I'm not going to bother to talk at hospice because I'm not going to say what people want to hear. Or people expect to hear, And then Teddy said, oh, come on, Mom, tell them a few stories. So here's one. Here's a story. All right, so I'm talking about how you can't use the word. So often we couldn't use the word hospice. So this was a patient. Her name was Mary. She was 90 years old. I loved her. She had a very large family, and she had abdominal cancer, and so they arranged for hospice care, and of course she was very happy because the doctor told her she didn't have cancer. So the family insisted that, my mother doesn't think she has cancer, and so as far as we're concerned, my mother doesn't have cancer, but you'll help us out, Ruth. And so, and on the one hand, we're never going to do anything to interfere with someone's hope. We don't do that. However, we also, and it's a fine balance, we also have to kind of shepherd someone to understanding what's going on so that they don't feel blindsided when, they do die, or they do start to suffer horribly, So it got to the point with this woman where she started to have pain, and her tumor started to grow so that it was noticeable. So I said to her family, I said, you guys, your mother, this is crazy making to not tell her that she has cancer. She really needs to know what's going on. So they said, okay, Ruth, you tell her. So I said, fine. So I went in to talk to her. So I'm starting to talk to her, and I'm telling her, Mary, and I'm starting to tell her there's nothing that can be done and this and that. And I was about to go into kind of the hospice spiel, which I can tell you later, but I didn't even get to it with Mary because I'm starting to tell her this, and she goes, oh, Ruth, I can see the folks. And she's so excited because it means she's going to die and she's going to be with her parents. She's going to see the folks, So I went out and told her kids, I said, listen, your mother is so excited. She's going to see your folks. And one of the other things, not one of them, but something I tried to do as best I could, as soon as I could, I tried to figure out what was the vocabulary that somebody used to talk about the fact that they were dying, or especially what might happen afterward. So that whatever if I knew their vocabulary, then I could give that to them in our discussions. So with Mary, as she's declining, I would just say, oh, Mary, you're getting closer to the folks. And she'd say, oh, really, Ruth? Really? And she'd be so happy that she was getting close, you know. But that's an example where I think, you know, the kids were protecting her. She didn't need that kind of protection. She really didn't need it, you know. But I think, let me just tell you a little bit about hospice so that we can all be on the same page. Because I think there's a lot of different ideas about it, okay. And hospice essentially is the care that someone gets at the end of their life. In the United States, hospice is what Medicare decides the care you get at the end of your life. And it's called the Hospice Medicare benefit. And they designed it to be for the last 6 months of someone's life. So you have to be certified. There have to be 2 doctors that say that if your life is going the way that it is, the normal, you know, trajectory is we think you're going to die within 6 months. Now, obviously, that often does not happen. Okay? And if it doesn't happen, then there has to be a procedure that someone goes through. It's called recertification. The whole team has to decide that this then is a person who continues to warrant these services and need these services. And they are services that Medicare agrees needs to be paid. Medicare also they write all the rules, and one of them is there's a team of people, and there's 4 people to the team. One is the doctor, one is the nurse, one is the chaplain, and one is the social worker. And everybody has to have those people involved in their care. Now, the social worker and the chaplain, they create what they work out with the family, whatever help they can get. And it's a non-denominational chaplain, and they do any number of different things, but I'm not going to go into the chaplain's role. And the social worker also, they do a number of different things. They have to be contacted, but they don't have to have ongoing support. The only person that has to go, that has to have contact with the patient, is the nurse. Okay? Now, I was lucky enough. I always worked with an incredible group of people. My colleagues were just extraordinary. And one of them was my medical director, Pat. And I gotta tell you, I used to think that this woman just sat in her office waiting for me to call. And I'm serious, because I would call, I would say, you know, to Dr. Bloom, and I said, Dr. Bloom, you know, Ruth Rankin, how are you? I'm not kidding, every time. And then it's like, how can I help? You know, well, it turns out I wasn't the only nurse that got Anyway, I was so lucky to work with Pat and numerous other people. Anyway, so, but I'm going to talk about me, my job as the nurse. Okay, what does the nurse do? And the nurse has to come, and the truth is Medicare says that the nurse only has to come once every 2 weeks, but that's very unusual, and that's only if we have someone who absolutely insists on that, kind of a curmudgeon, and they also were my favorites. And I'll speak about some of them. But now just a minute. What was I talking about?
What a nurse does.
Thank you very much, Robin. Okay, yes, what a nurse does. So I felt, okay, essentially the umbrella of my job was to do everything I could to help someone to be comfortable at the end of their life, and to help the people that were caring for them to feel confident in providing that care. That's the core of it, okay? Now, the more I did this, the more I started to understand that, yes, you know, I hear a lot of stories, and there's a lot of people that think when you get a telephone call, it's somebody who has died that's getting in touch with you. Really, I'm serious. I have a lot of those stories too. I saying?
What a nurse does.
What a nurse does.
To keep them comfortable and people.
Right, okay. To be comfortable, right? And when I would go and I would first meet people, meet the family and meet the patients, and in hospice you think of the family as the patient, okay? I would explain to them that this, I'm going to do everything I can to help you be comfortable and da-da-da-da. And basically, the core of a hospice nurse's job is education. And then, of course, there's always the emotional support that goes along with that, but education, that's the prime thing that we're doing, because what I did was I went to people's homes, okay? There are places that people can go into patient hospice. That was not what I did, and that's not the bulk of where care is given here. So I went all over the city to people's homes, and I would help the families or whoever was the caregiver, and there were many different configurations of who provided care, to know how to give that care and to feel confident in giving that care and to feel that they had somebody in their back pocket that was available at any point in time to help them. That wouldn't necessarily be me, but it would be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was always someone at my hospice who would answer the phone call, who would tell them, who would give them advice, and if need be, there was someone who could go to the home. So, anyway, you're going to be happy that I retired. I lost my train of thought again.
Well, we were thinking about curmudgeons.
No, but they're great. Okay. As I did this more, and I would talk to people, I would say to them, of course, I really want to help you be comfortable, da-da-da. But I found out as I did it, really what I was doing, I was going to help people to die the way that they wanted. Because there were a lot of people who chose, for many different reasons, to continue to have pain. Okay? They did not want to be, that was important to them. Okay? That was important. Now, that wasn't the rule of thumb. And it was always my job to offer best practices, always to try to explain to them that they're in pain. I know ways that, things I can help them so that they don't have pain. And, some of the reasons why people would choose, one wonderful woman loved her, mouth on her, and very, very angry at the beginning. And, we had a great relationship. But she never, ever went along with me to take pain medication. She had pancreatic cancer. Anyway, because she believed that for her God, that she believed in, it was very important that there be suffering at the end of life. That was critical. And so she wouldn't accept it, and I was never successful. Now, in my job, I would continually ask her, but I would ask her in a way that was very respectful of what she was doing, because this is the other part, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I learned that I didn't know what was best for my patients, okay? I didn't know. Even though I had the knowledge to help them not be in pain, or help them not be exceedingly anxious, or help them, to not be nauseous, or, any number of things that people would be experiencing, right? I know how to do that. If I don't know how to do it, I've got an extraordinary group of doctors behind me, available 24 hours a day. Never once did a physician intimate that my question was stupid, or they didn't have time for me, or they weren't appreciative that I called, But still, if people didn't want to do what I suggested, then that was to be completely respected. And the more that I did this, the more I just, some of the newer nurses, they took it personally, or they felt they were failing, but I just didn't, I just didn't. And there were a lot of people that I didn't help in the ways that I would have necessarily liked to have helped them. But I helped them in the way that it was important for them to be helped. So one of the reasons why people wanted but not wanted. They don't want pain. Well, Mary might have wanted pain, since for her that was a piece of her entry into heaven, was physical pain, you know. But others were more wanting to be lucid, okay? And that also, a lot of times that was a patient, but a lot of other times that was the family. And the family wanted them to be lucid, and the family wouldn't give them the medication that I honestly believed they wanted to, you know. Well, we had to deal with the whole family, and I had to, I never gave up, okay? I never gave up. And I would come about it from all kinds of different angles, and frequently people that didn't want to, basically we're talking about morphine. And frequently people that didn't want to have anything to do with it, they eventually did, and they were able to really embrace this, and really in a way that they saw that this was helpful and loving, that this was the most loving thing they could do, not killing their loved one, which is what many people thought morphine was going to do, you know. So being lucid was one. Being able to move, to ambulate was one. I had one patient, his name was Paul. He lived in the Irving Park YMCA. He lived by himself. He was a very frightened, anxious fellow, and I had to go to his house at 2 p.m. And if I couldn't be a minute early, and I couldn't be a minute late. I had to be there at 2 p.m. That was it. And it would just be too hard for him emotionally if I was going to be late. It just wasn't going to work, you know, so I was there at 2 p.m. Anyway, and he lived by himself. He had a sister who kept in touch. She loved him, you know, from the distance. And she would stop by, and she and her husband would see him every week. But anyway, he had terrible pain. He wouldn't tell me he had terrible pain. Okay. I mean, I could see he had pain when I was there, but in addition to that, at the Y, there's thin walls, and the fellow who lived in the next room, he would say to me, week after week, he would say, I hear him crying at night in pain. I would continually talk to him about it. I would try to find ways. I'm afraid you're going to cry, Pat, because of all these patients I let down. Anyway, you know, we had different ways to administer pain. I mean, he wouldn't necessarily have to take the pill. Sometimes if that's hard for people, we can give them patches. There's a lot. But it was so important to him to be independent, okay? Mm-hmm. And he had to be able to walk by himself to the bathroom down the hall. And that was the most important thing to him. And so he could not, he couldn't threaten the fact that he would be able to be mobile like that. And he had to live by himself. We have home health aides that come. They're incredibly helpful. I would have loved to get somebody there once a day helping him. I'd be another set of eyes on him, everything. He had to be by himself. He wouldn't accept any help. And he wouldn't go anywhere where he would have gotten support, where he would have gotten medication. He wouldn't do that, you know. And that was important. That's what he needed, you know. But what finally, I was able to transfer him to our inpatient unit, because finally it got too much for him, okay? And even when I did that, I could only do it saying, if you would go to this place, there'll be doctors all the time, and they could really help him to be more comfortable, and then he can come home. Because so many people, theoretically, that's what the inpatient unit is for. It's to help symptoms get controlled so that people can go back home. It's not a place that you go in order to die. That's not one of the things that Medicare wants that facility to be used for. However, what happens is that people do die when they're there. And he agreed to go, and it was a snowstorm, blizzard. And for whatever reasons, where I worked would not let me go in the ambulance with him. And he was a very frightened person. So I couldn't. I followed in the ambulance. I got there first, so that when he got out of the ambulance, he saw someone he knew. And he died the next day. So as far as he's concerned, he did live independently. He did live by himself. And when his actual death came, I'm sure that it was peaceful and that he was now no longer in pain, because that's what they would have done to help him at the inpatient unit, you know. He was so heroic, you know. And some people thought I went around, you know, all day long going from one dying person to another. And I did. I did indeed. You know, the whole city of Chicago. But really, eventually, it became so clear that what I was doing was I was driving around going from one heroic person to the next. You know, that's what I was doing. Either the patient, or if the patient wasn't aware of what was going on, which was often the case, especially if dementia was a piece of it, then the caregivers. So I am going to pick this up just because, since I'm on the topic of why people don't take pain medication. Oh, well, there's one other one that I would bump into, and it had to do with I mean, there's other ones, but these are the main ones. Anyway, how it was relational, essentially, and it was how people were, how they were perceived by important people, mostly in their family. So that it would, periodically, there would be a grandfather, let's say, and he was having pain. But for him to take pain medication, that was going to be a weakness. And he didn't want to model that weakness to his grandchildren, you know. So he was going to be stoic, and that was important. And, you know, as much as I would work with him, as much as I would work with the family, when I would understand that was the reason, I would work with the grandkids. There were some, it just didn't, that was his definition of himself, and that was not going to change. I mean, when people die, you know, they've been doing a dance their whole life, and families have been doing a dance their whole life, and that doesn't change because people are now dying, you know. But the best I could do, and it wasn't the best, I mean, I had it fun. I had to figure out how to dance with them. You know, what was the dance in this family or that couple or this, you know. And then if I could figure that out, then I could be useful to them, you know. Anyway, so, and it wasn't just in pain management that I repeatedly learned that I didn't know what was best. You know, a lot of this came down to control, okay, to control. And it's not easy to die, you know. And what's happening when you die is basically your body is getting increasingly less capable and increasingly less predictable. And that's not fun to experience, you know. It isn't. And so people want to have as much control as they can over this process, you know, over their lives, as basically they're losing control over their lives. They're losing control over their being, you know. And it's the same with families. Families want to be in control. They want to do everything that they can to help the person that they love and to help them understand that, no, you know what, you got to step back. You got to let them do it their way. You got to let them not eat. Oh, that's a huge one, you know. Anyway, or there might be physical things going on, physical things that I would have. Another guy I loved, and he was a hoarder. He lived in his home, and you could hardly get to the bathroom. And he basically couldn't move very well at all, and he had congestive heart failure, and he had these huge legs, and I think this is okay. Anyway, I mean, I don't want to give you gory details, but I'm just trying to tell you what people's lives were like and what I was trying to do. Anyway, he had very edematous legs, and they were what we call weeping. And then he had, you know, he tried to use the socks, whatever you call those, pressure socks. Anyway, and they really weren't helping, and they were just totally stuck to his legs, and his legs were bleeding, and I was just, there was nothing in life I wanted more than to take the stockings off this man, you know, to soak his feet and to put salve, you know. He wouldn't let me touch it, you know, forget it. I'm fine, Ruth. I'm fine. He was a bit of a curmudgeon. No, he wasn't a curmudgeon. It took me a long time to be able to get into his house. And he would only let me come once a week. But he was great. He'd been in the Korean War, and he had PTSD from it. And it was very, very difficult for him. And this isn't where I was going to say it next, but this was interesting. One day, okay, you know, he must have crawled to the bathroom, okay, because his mattress was on the floor. I don't know how he got up. I don't think he did. There was one neighborhood person that could come in for about 6 hours a day and sit there. That's the only help he would take. He wouldn't take any other help. I could not get a nursing assistant in there, you know. And then, but he had a wonderful niece who was his power of attorney, and she's the one that got us in there. Anyway, one day he called her up, and he told her that he was going to take a nap, and during his nap he was going to die. And he'd been declining, and one of the things that was starting was he sat in the same position, and he was, you know, his spine, and he started to have terrible breakdown on his spine. And I would say, you know, Bill, you've got to move. You've got, you know, this is really going to be difficult for you. It's really going to be painful. It's really, you know, and of course he never moved. And I would just mention it again, you know. There was never a reprimand. There was never a you are disappointing me. There was never, it was just always, you know, remember I said if you moved a little bit, I really still think that that would help you from getting a sore there, you know. Anyway, so it was really, soon after I said that to him, you know, I said, Bill, you know, it's not going to get better, and you're like this, and it's really going to create problems for you. And he calls up his niece, and he says, I'm taking a nap, and then I'm going to die in the nap. And that's what he did. He did, you know. Now, I don't have a lot of stories like that, but I do have some stories like that. I know there's a lot of discussion or a lot of belief that people choose the moments in which they die or they let go, or, you know. And I have no idea what I believe about that. Basically, I know that I don't know, because I had a lot of experiences where it looked like that was happening, and I had a lot of experiences where it didn't make any sense to me because it was so clear to me that this person wanted to die. You know, she would say, this was Rita, she would say, I'm not going to be here next week. I'm not going to be here next week. I'd say, well, you know, Rita, it's been great. It's just been great. And this would be every week. I'm not kidding. You know, she was just great. And she told me anyway, she thought she was going to go see her brother. She just loved her brother. She's 80 years old, and these are her older brothers, and she's excited to see him. Anyway, so I was talking with her once, and I said, Rita, do you really think you're going to see your brothers? And she goes, no, but wouldn't it be fun if I did? They were great. Anyway, so I'm talking about the ways that I don't know what's best for me. Just about all of them. And once I knew that, and once I just danced with them, and once I understood that they were going to make choices, I absolutely believed that I knew physically what was in the best interest for them. And I just came to understand that that was one aspect of their life right now. It was not the sum total at all. There was so much more to be considered, you know. And with families, there's two places with families this really came up. One had to do with medication, and it had to do with morphine, and a lot of families did not want to use morphine. They were scared of it, and they really believed that it would kill the person that they loved. And the truth is, I would say this to them when they finally started using it, I would say, there is going to be a last dose of morphine, but that doesn't mean that that's what killed them. But if you're giving somebody morphine, there's going to be a last dose. And you just have to be so careful that the family doesn't interpret that as them thinking that they have now killed that person that they love, But that kept a lot of people. Educating people about morphine was a big part of my job, it really was. And the other with families had to do with eating, okay? Had to do with eating. And it was so difficult for families when their person that they were caring for didn't want to eat anymore. And because they really felt they were starving them. And they would talk about starving them. And that they're going to die of starvation. And this was so painful for families, very, very painful. And so I would say, because it's very common that people stop eating, okay? Because basically what's happening is your body's getting less and less capable, right? And the systems are getting less and less capable and predictable, and they're starting to shut down, Well, your digestion and, your desire for food, that's all a part of it. So that's a pretty given that if somebody goes through a dying process, it's pretty much a given that they're going to stop eating or certainly lose interest in food. So I would say to kind of help with this fear that they were, how could they starve someone they love so much? And I would say if somebody wants food and is capable of using that food to their benefit, and they're deprived of that food, that's starvation, But if someone can't utilize the food and really doesn't even want the food, that's not starvation. That's that's respecting what's going on with them. And that, I used to say, I know it's hard because from the get-go, we feed people to show them our love. That's what we do. We got babies, we feed them. And all the time, all the way through the life, we feed, we bring, special foods and this and that and the other. And so that's the whole model, that's the paradigm that we all exist in. And we're asking these people to totally turn it upside down. And I would say, we're used to showing our love for people by feeding them. But this is different now. He doesn't need food. He doesn't want food. He can't use food. And so now, the way that you show your love is by not feeding them. Not offer. Absolutely offer. But if they don't want it, that's fine. And so you are showing your love by not insisting that they eat. And when they felt that, this is a way to be loving, it was easier for them to then not, to let them not eat. And the other thing I would say is, when you ask, if you're disappointed that whoever is not eating, you're reflecting to them somehow that they're disappointing you, And there's so much going on now, and they need so much, and I know you don't want to reflect that to them. You don't want them to be worried that, oh my God, I can't even die right, I'm disappointing my daughter or my husband or because that is a burden to them, that really, and when they would see it that way, then it would be a lot easier. They could accept the fact that this person didn't want to eat, and that this person was dying, and that this was a way to really be loving, be really loving to them. So, I don't know what I was going to say now, but I might jump to my curmudgeons. Okay, some of my favorites. Well, you've heard about some of them already. But basically, and I want to say that most of the time, families were very gracious, they were very appreciative, patients were very gracious and appreciative. So my curmudgeons are not the rule of thumb, okay? But I loved them. So, okay, here's one. He was one of my last patients. He was Spanish speaking, his name was Carlos, so I would mostly say Senor. Anyway, so I call up, I'm just trying to get to know him. I call up and I say, hello, you know, this is a nurse and there's a hang up. But I don't think that happened. I think we just got disconnected, you know? Like, I'm interesting, I'm optimistic. That's what I think. So I call him right back and I say, hello, senor, this is the nurse. Oh, shut up. And he hangs up. That's what he got, you know? I knew this was a match made in heaven. I'm serious, because this is the exact kind of patient I love. I just love. Anyway, so, and eventually, well, the way that it would happen, eventually, the way I got in, eventually I call his daughter. And I said, he's not letting me come in. And so she said, I'll call him and I'll tell him that he has to let you come in. Well, eventually, no, initially he wouldn't let me come in, but he did go down to the lobby and meet me in the lobby, you know. Anyway, we did fine. Then Rose, I've talked about Rose, even though she was one of my all-time favorites. She lived along the lake. She lived close to Hyde Park. And she had married, she was a white woman who had married a black man, and she had been completely disowned by her family. Completely, totally disowned by her family. And she was a hospice patient, not for dementia, but she did have a sizable degree of dementia. Anyway, so she was very private, very proud, had no family around. And when I said there were a lot of different configurations of caregivers, okay, her caregivers were two people that lived in her building. And one became her power of attorney for healthcare and another one for property. And that was not uncommon, that people would step in when people needed it and become their guardians. Anyway, she wouldn't let me in the house. Her apartment, she'd slam the door in my face. She just, I didn't know how I was going to get into her. And she did need help. She really did need help. And eventually, you know, literally, you know that expression, foot in the door? Anyway, so I eventually, you know, I got in, she let me in, and her dementia was such that it really was a while because she wouldn't necessarily know me the next time, so that was hard. Here I am trying to establish trust with someone who doesn't necessarily have that capability. Eventually, we did. But with her, the reason I mentioned her family was because eventually with her, she did let me in. We would just like lounge around. I'd like lay on her bed with her, you know, and we'd be like college roommates or something, you know. And we had it was a wonderful relationship. But what we talked about was, we talked about her family because she, with her dementia, she really didn't remember anything after a certain age. And so we'd had these conversations about, you know, oh, her dad and her, you know, it's like it's daddy and mommy and her brothers and sisters, and she just talked to them on the phone. And I said, oh, Rose, well, what did he say? You know, what did he say? And she would tell me, oh, he's going to come and pick me up at school, you know, and I'd say, oh, that's so great, you know, what did you do? And she'd say, oh, and she'd tell me what she did at school that day, you know, because that, I was so delighted with the connection, and that was what her reality was. Her reality had nothing to do with the fact that she lived in Hyde Park, that she'd had this, on 47th Street, she had a haberdashery, when 47th Street was a really thriving community, you know. But it was Another thing that I really loved was if I could manage to help someone to stay at home who wanted to be at home when it was very difficult for them to be at home, okay? And she was one of these people. And one of the reasons she's in my curmudgeon category is because we did finally get somebody in there for a few hours a day, not one of our people, because our people would have withstood this. Well, no, we wouldn't have done that either. Anyway, we got somebody, and she was physically, she just would hit the person. And so we couldn't get anybody in there, you know? So and she wouldn't answer the door. I knew that from the beginning, so we had to put a lockbox on. And, you know, you have to get permission. I had to get permission from because you couldn't get permission from her because that wouldn't have been fair, you know? So from her, the powers of attorney said absolutely fine, and so then I could get into her house, but, you know, I'd say, Rose, I'm coming, you know, by this time I think she, it must have been my voice, whatever. She was comfortable, she wasn't frightened when I came, and we managed to help her to stay in her home until she died, you know? And that was great. That was just great. Just great. The truth is, there's a number of people I was able to, but I didn't do it myself, okay? I didn't do it myself at all. Remember, I'm part of a team, and I mentioned the doctor, social worker, chaplain, and nurse, okay? There's other people, key, if not like the heart and soul of hospice, are the nursing assistants, okay? And they're the people who give the actual hands-on care, okay? I don't do that. I mean, I do that obviously if I'm in somebody's home and that's what's needed, but otherwise, there's someone who goes and they do the bathing and the dressing and they do all of that. And, okay, I was talking about the nursing assistants.
A team of
Oh, I would, right, it's a team of people. Anyway, if there were somebody, we couldn't do it with Rose because Rose wouldn't let people in, okay? But basically, other people, with the team, I would go twice a week, the nursing assistant would go 3 times a week, and then the chaplain would come in, or we would get weekend coverage. We would somehow make it so that someone was visiting that patient every day, so that we knew what was going on, you know? So, and then I always had the team of physicians, you know, which was critical. I had them in my back pocket. Anyway, this one, he wasn't a curmudgeon, but his wife was. And this was a Spanish-speaking family, and only Spanish-speaking. And usually, which was very common, we have a language line. And if you look at the brochure for the language line, it's the most beautiful thing because it has like 27 different languages and it has one sentence, the same sentence, you know? And so it's all these languages that, you know, they're not our alphabet. And it's just so beautiful to see it. So I could get any language I wanted at any time, okay? They're not sitting there, you know, they send it, well, I guess you all know that. We don't have somebody from every nationality sitting in a room waiting for us to come. It goes over to the anyway. So anyway, but Spanish was the most common one. And so I could use a language line if I didn't have, usually a family member would be able to do the translating. But so I get to see this man, and he and his wife, Maria, and I say what I always say when I'm, you know, in this situation. I say, I'm really just so sorry that I don't speak Spanish. At which point everyone says, don't worry about it. At which point Maria says, so am I. You gotta admit, I loved her. It took a while, but we had a great relationship, and her husband had ALS, and we had to eventually move him to our inpatient facility. And, you know, I never really learned Spanish, and Maria never learned English, but I would go to at that point we did understand that he was not going to go home. He wasn't. He was young. And so I would sing to her. So we'd go outside, and that was like outside, and I would sing, and I wasn't singing in Spanish, you know? I was singing Summertime and Turaluralura, you know? But we would walk, and we'd have our arms around each other, and it was wonderful, you know? It was really wonderful. Which makes me think of singing and another fellow. This was another patient who had ALS. His was very, very progressed. And,
What's ALS?
oh, that's Lou Gehrig's disease. So he would be lifted by what's called a Hoyer lift out of his bed into a chair. And his head was, you know, tied up. And the only movement he had was in this finger, okay? And he's Spanish speaking, okay? And he really couldn't smile. He couldn't smile anymore. He had no language. He had a tube. So it was Christmas time. So I came in with my Santa Claus hat, singing Feliz Navidad, you know? And he, so he's like this, and so his eye, there's a smile in his eye, and he goes like this. And he loved it. He just loved it. So I just kept prancing around the room, saying, Feliz Navidad, you know? It was great. But I had a lot of experiences like this. I was wondering about how I would talk for an hour, but I should probably think of opening up for questions. But there's a couple other things I want to say though. Just because music, I had such fun with music. One was a time where I had to, I had to put a catheter in a woman because her hips was it was broken, and to move back and forth was way too painful for her. And so in order to not have to change her like that, this had to be put in, and this is not, this is never a pleasant thing to have happen, but it's really not pleasant when somebody has to, turn you when you have a hip that's broken, that's painful. And so I started to sing Jesus Loves You. And her family joins in, and then there's people in the hallway too. This is like that. And so they're not coming in while I'm doing this. She's getting her privacy, But there's all these, people singing Jesus Loves You, and it was helpful. It was really helpful, And I had another experience where this was an on-call. It was the middle of the night. I didn't know this person. I better be quiet though, because I didn't even get to half the people I wanted to tell you about.
About 10 minutes.
You can come back. Yeah, come back.
No, they were so wonderful. That now in Chicago, I know Chicago like you can't believe. And I didn't know Chicago, even though I grew up in Oak Park, But now I've had patients essentially in every neighborhood in Chicago. And that is also of what has meant the most to me and affected me most and helped me the most, is that I was able to be with people who I otherwise would never have been able to be with. And though I was all over the city of Chicago, because I did do this for a long time, but the last few years I was essentially on the south side and the west side. And that afforded me the opportunity to, especially because we live in such a segregated society, that I really was able to meet people and be with them and be useful to them and learn from them, because maybe I'll stop talking after I say this. I don't want to minimize in any way, shape, or form the despair and the horror of the poverty that so many people live in, and especially on the south and west sides, especially the African American population. And so I will not minimize that. But I will also say that the resilience that I experienced in so many of these families was so profound and so touching and so moving. And so I'll open to questions in 1 second. And well, there were two people. One, I go to see him and I would say, Cornelius, how you doing? And he'd say, pretty good, pretty good. Every single time. Pretty good, pretty good. Now this man was dying. So, I mean, I didn't even get into what it's like when people actually die. You know, he was really dying. And then but he was not ever going to complain. He was pretty good no matter what was going on. No matter. And then I go once again, how are you, Cornelius? And he tells me he's pretty good. And he dies soon after. Anyway, and then there's another patient, and this was one of the things that meant a lot to me was there were numerous patients I had whose families were part of the migration, the Great Migration from the South. And the last patient, I still have many patients who were descendants of the people who had migrated, but this was my last patient who actually was part of the migration. And she had very significant dementia, and her daughter gave her I didn't talk. Her daughter gave her absolutely incredible care, just incredible care. And her mother needed tremendous care, and they lived in a situation that it was not a situation that we would choose to live in, you know. And every day, or every time I would go, I would say, Martha, you know, how are you? And she would say, blessed to see another day. And she absolutely meant it, you know. So I have to say this. So one of the biggest things that was a part of my job was celebrating and bearing witness to the incredible caregivers, okay? Incredible caregivers. And so many of them, like with Martha, especially if someone had dementia, and many people had dementia, they were not aware of the care that they were being given. You know, they just weren't. They weren't able to, you know, that's clear, okay? And so what was so critical to what I did was I could appreciate it. I could bear witness. I could celebrate it. I could be sure that they knew that it was being seen, that what they were doing was being seen as sacred work, because that's what it was. And so I love Chicago. You know, I drive all over Chicago, and I know who lives behind the doors of all this, the whole city. It's like Hospice Work gave me the city of Chicago because I know what's going on, and I just am so infinitely grateful to have been able to do this. And I gave you 3 minutes.
Good time.
3 minutes. So, and do people have questions? Pat.
Ruthie, I love you. Wow, that was wonderful. Here we go.
Yes. Thank you.
All those years.
Yeah.
I was on the other end of the phone call, and I am sitting in my office, and Ruthie is sitting in God knows what kind of situation. So I knew when she called me that I needed to help her. But then she'd call me and she'd say, Pat, I got this patient and I want you to come and see with me, you know. They had some, I don't know, ulcer on their leg or something. And I would go out there. Usually Ruth would come with me. And that would be really, I mean, I couldn't believe how some of these people lived. I mean, it was just an incredible eye-opening. And Ruth was just there and, you know, taking charge and helping those folks, and it was amazing. Sometimes you'd go and there'd be, you know, drug dealing going on in the corners, and was kind of scary, but you know, they never hurt us because they knew that we were going in there to help. So, but thank you, Ruth. I love you.
I just wanted to say that the hardest thing about being the husband of a hospice nurse was explaining to all my friends why I had so many adult diapers in the car.
That was the hardest thing.